A particular burden exists in every human life, one which neither wealth nor power can alleviate. It is the weight of our own history, those accumulated moments, decisions, and circumstances that have shaped us into who we are today. This burden grows heavier with each passing year as our collection of memories, regrets, and what-ifs expands. The past, unlike the future, presents itself as immutable, a fixed reality beyond our power to change. This immutability can transform our history into a source of profound anguish when we find ourselves haunted by regret or shame about what once was. Yet within the philosophical tradition, particularly in the works of Friedrich Nietzsche, we find a radical alternative to this anguish, the concept of Amor Fati, the love of fate. This notion represents not merely an acceptance of our past, but a genuine embrace of it. A transformation of our relationship with our own history, from one of resistance to one of affirmation. Nietzsche's philosophy offers us not an escape from our past, but rather a path toward reconciliation with it. This essay explores the challenging yet liberating practice of accepting, even embracing, one's past through the lens of Nietzschean philosophy. The human predicament, trapped between memory and desire. Before delving into philosophical remedies, we must first understand the nature of our predicament. Human consciousness exists in a peculiar state. We are creatures pulled between memory and anticipation, forever dwelling in a present moment, colored by both past experience and future expectation. Unlike other animals who may live more fully in the immediate present, we humans carry our histories with us, allowing them to shape our perceptions, decisions, and self-concept. This capacity for memory has bestowed upon us remarkable advantages as a species. Through cultural memory and recorded history, we accumulate knowledge across generations. Through personal memory, we learn from our experiences and construct a coherent sense of identity. Yet these same capacities also create unique forms of suffering. The ability to remember is simultaneously the ability to regret. Memories do not remain static over time. They evolve through the interpretive lens of our present circumstances. As we change, our relationship to our past changes as well. The carefree decisions of youth may appear reckless from the vantage point of middle age. The seemingly minor choice at a crossroads might, in retrospect, reveal itself as a pivotal moment that altered the entire trajectory of our lives. This retroactive significance can transform ordinary memories into sources of intense regret when we find ourselves dissatisfied with present circumstances. Further complicating this dynamic is the fact that memory itself is not a perfect record, but rather a reconstructive process. We do not simply recall past events, we rebuild them anew each time, influenced by our current knowledge, beliefs, and emotional states. This malleability means our relationship with our past is never entirely fixed. It remains susceptible to reinterpretation and re-evaluation throughout our lives. This interplay of memory, identity, and regret creates a complex psychological terrain. When we find ourselves troubled by our past, several common responses emerge. First, There is denial, the attempt to suppress unwanted memories or diminish their significance. While this may provide temporary relief, denied aspects of our history often return with greater force, undermining our sense of wholeness and authenticity. Second, there is rumination, the compulsive revisiting of painful memories and counterfactual scenarios. If only I had chosen differently, we tell ourselves, imagining alternate lives that might have unfolded had we made other choices. This mental habit keeps us tethered to a past we cannot change. Third, there is rationalization, the attempt to justify or explain away actions we find troubling. While this approach acknowledges the past, it often fails to genuinely integrate it, instead creating elaborate narratives that distance us from full accountability. Fourth, there is despair, the surrender to a deterministic view that our past mistakes define us completely, foreclosing any possibility of redemption or growth. None of these responses offers a sustainable path toward reconciliation with our history. Each represents a form of resistance, an unwillingness to fully confront and accept what has been. It is precisely this resistance that Nietzsche's philosophy challenges through the radical notion of Amor Fati. Nietzsche's vision from resistance to affirmation. Friedrich Nietzsche stands as one of the most provocative and influential philosophers of the modern era. Writing in the late 19th century, he developed a body of thought that challenged conventional morality, religion, and metaphysics. Central to his philosophical project was profound concern with how humans might live meaningfully in a world without transcendent values or divine purpose. Rather than seeking comfort in otherworldly promises, Nietzsche urged a fierce embrace of life in all its complexity, contradiction, and tragedy. It is within this broader philosophical vision that the concept of Amor Fati, love of fate, emerges as a cornerstone. Nietzsche articulates this idea most explicitly in his later works, including Ecce Homo and the Gay Science. In the latter, he writes, "I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. Amor Fati, let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to wage war against what is ugly. I do not want to accuse, I do not even want to accuse those who accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation. And all in all and on the whole, someday I wish to be only a yes-sayer." This passage reveals several critical dimensions of Amor Fati. First, it represents a profound shift in perception, learning to see necessity not as constraining, but as beautiful. Second, it entails a creative act, making things beautiful through our interpretation of them. Third, it requires abandoning accusation, including the accusation of oneself. Finally, it aspires toward an ultimate affirmation, becoming only a yes-sayer. For Nietzsche, Amor Fati is not merely a stoic resignation to what cannot be changed. It is not gritting one's teeth and enduring life's hardships. Rather, it represents a transformation of our relationship with necessity itself, a recognition that what has happened could not have happened otherwise, given the infinite causal chains that produced it, and furthermore, that this necessity is integral to who we are. To wish away any element of our past is, in a sense, to wish away ourselves. This perspective stands in stark contrast to what Nietzsche calls the spirit of revenge, the resentment directed toward time itself and its irreversibility. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra he writes, "This, yes this alone, is revenge itself, the will's revulsion against time and its it was." the spirit of revenge. My friends, that has been mankind's best reflection until now, and where there was suffering, there always had to be punishment. The spirit of revenge manifests as our rage against what cannot be undone. It reveals itself in our tendency to punish ourselves for past mistakes, to dwell in regret, and to resist accepting the irrevocable nature of what has occurred. This spirit, according to Nietzsche, has poisoned human psychology throughout history, preventing us from fully affirming life. Amor Fati represents the antidote to this poisonous spirit, a liberation from the need to wage war against time's arrow. It asks us to consider, what if every moment of our lives, including our mistakes, failures, and suffering, were not just acceptable but necessary components of who we are? What if nothing could be subtracted from our history without simultaneously diminishing us? This perspective does not trivialize genuine suffering or excuse harmful actions. Rather, it recontextualizes them within a larger view of life as a complex totality. The pain remains real, the moral implications of our choices remain significant, but our relationship to these realities transforms when we view them as integral rather than alien to our being. Nietzsche's concept of the eternal recurrence further illuminates Amor Fati. This thought experiment asks us to imagine that we would have to live our lives over and over again, eternally, with every detail exactly the same, every joy, every sorrow, every mistake, every mundane moment. The truly life-affirming response, according to Nietzsche, would be to welcome this prospect rather than be horrified by it. In the gay science, he poses the question, what if some day or night a demon were to steal into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once again and innumerable times again, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unspeakably small or great in your life must return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, "You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine"? The eternal recurrence serves as the ultimate test of life affirmation. Could we embrace every moment of our lives, including our regrets, failures, and suffering, as worthy of infinite repetition? This is not an easy standard to meet. It challenges us to move beyond mere acceptance towards something more profound, gratitude for the totality of our existence, including its darkest chapters. Amor Fati thus emerges as a radical philosophical stance that transforms our relationship with our own history. It invites us to see the past not as a burden to be overcome, but as the necessary foundation of our present being, to love not just despite what has happened, but because of it. This perspective does not erase the pain of difficult memories, but it recontextualizes them within a larger affirmation of life itself. Beyond regret, the liberation of self-acceptance. The philosophy of Amor Fati offers a powerful counterpoint to the trap of regret that captures so many lives. Regret represents a particular form of suffering, one born not from direct experience, but from comparison between what is and what might have been. It exists in the gap between reality and possibility, feeding on counterfactual thinking. Psychologically, regret serves certain functions. It can motivate learning and behavior change when we recognize suboptimal choices. It can reinforce moral awareness when we acknowledge harms we have caused. Yet when regret becomes chronic or excessive, it transforms from adaptive reflection into maladaptive rumination, keeping us trapped in cycles of self-recrimination without productive resolution. What makes past-oriented regret particularly painful is its conjunction of responsibility with powerlessness. We feel we should have acted differently while simultaneously knowing we cannot go back to change what happened. This combination can produce a special kind of torment, one where accountability meets futility. The philosophy of Amor Fati addresses this predicament not by diminishing responsibility, but by reconceiving its meaning. It suggests that true responsibility includes accepting not just the consequences of our actions, but their necessity within the causal web of existence. Every choice we made emerged from who we were at that moment, influenced by countless factors: our knowledge, emotions, beliefs, circumstances, and the accumulated weight of prior experiences. Given all these factors, could we truly have acted otherwise? This perspective doesn't absolve us of moral responsibility in the conventional sense. Nietzsche was no determinist arguing that free will is merely an illusion. Rather, his view suggests a more nuanced understanding of freedom, one that acknowledges how our choices flow from our character, which itself emerges from the interplay of innate tendencies and life experiences. Liberation comes when we recognize that self-forgiveness need not depend on believing we could have acted differently. Instead, it can arise from accepting that our actions, however regrettable, were expressions of who we were at that time. This recognition shifts our focus from futile wishes about the past toward the present question of who we are becoming now. The French philosopher Albert Camus, influenced by Nietzschean thought, captured this sentiment in his essay The Myth of Sisyphus. Confronting the absurdity of human existence, our desire for meaning in an apparently indifferent universe, Camus concludes that we must imagine Sisyphus happy even as he eternally pushes his boulder up the mountain. This happiness emerges not from changing his circumstance, but from fully embracing it, from recognizing the boulder as his own. Similarly, Amor Fati invites us to recognize our past as our own, not as an alien burden imposed upon us, but as the very substance of our being. Our mistakes, sufferings, and regrets are not obstacles to our authentic self, but constitutive elements of it. When we genuinely accept this, something remarkable happens. The energy previously spent resisting what cannot be changed becomes available for creative engagement with what can be. This liberation doesn't mean abandoning moral reflection or accountability. Rather, it means engaging with our moral responsibilities from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation, from acceptance rather than internal warfare. From this foundation, we can acknowledge harms we have caused, make amends where possible, and commit to different choices moving forward, all without the paralyzing weight of unproductive shame or regret. Acceptance in this sense is not passive resignation, but active integration. It requires courage to face aspects of ourselves and our history that we might prefer to deny. It demands the maturity to acknowledge our limitations and fallibility without defensiveness, and it calls for compassion, extending to ourselves the same understanding we might offer to others who have erred or fallen short. The paradox of Amor Fati is that by fully accepting what was, we become more capable of creating what might be. When we stop expending psychological energy fighting against our past, we liberate that energy for present engagement and future creation. The person who has made peace with their history stands more firmly in the present, unburdened by the need to justify, explain, or escape from what has been. The eternal present, time and reconciliation. Our relationship with the past is inextricably linked to our conception of time itself. The conventional linear model of time, past flowing into present, flowing into future, shapes how we experience our own histories. Within this framework, the past appears fixed and unalterable, separated from us by an unbridgeable temporal gap. This conception reinforces our sense of powerlessness regarding what has occurred and contributes to the anguish of regret. Nietzsche, along with other philosophers who followed him, challenges this rigid linearity. In developing concepts like the eternal recurrence and Amor Fati, he gestures toward a more complex temporality, one where past, present, and future exist in dynamic interrelation rather than strict succession. This reimagining of time offers new possibilities for reconciliation with our histories. The philosopher Martin Heidegger, influenced by Nietzschean thought, developed the concept of ecstatic temporality, the idea that human existence always already encompasses past, present, and future simultaneously. We exist not just in the narrow present moment, but in an expanded temporal field where what has been and what might be continuously inflect our current being. From this perspective, the past is never simply over and done with, but remains alive within us, subject to ongoing interpretation and integration. This view suggests that while we cannot change the factual content of past events, we retain significant power over their meaning in our lives. The past, in this sense, is not a static entity, but a dynamic relationship, one that evolves as we evolve. What happened cannot be undone, but how we carry those events within us remains perpetually open to transformation. French philosopher Gilles Deleuze, in his interpretation of Nietzsche, describes this as the difference between chronos and aion, two distinct conceptions of time. Chronos represents conventional chronological time, while aion refers to time as depth or intensity rather than linear progression. Within aion, moments are not simply replaced by subsequent moments, but continue to resonate and interact across conventional temporal boundaries. These philosophical reframings of temporality align remarkably well with contemporary psychological understandings of memory and narrative identity. Research consistently shows that memories are not fixed recordings, but reconstructive processes influenced by our current perspectives. Each time we recall a past event, we subtly reshape it according to our present understanding. This malleability means that our relationship with our past remains fluid throughout our lives. Narrative psychologists have demonstrated the profound impact of how we story our lives, how the narratives we construct about our experiences shape not just our understanding of the past, but our present emotional states and future possibilities. When we shift from narratives centered on victimhood, failure, or irredeemable mistake to narratives of growth, integration, and necessary experience, we transform our relationship with our history without denying its factual reality. This perspective reveals the radical potential of Amor Fati as more than mere acceptance. When we love our fate, we actively participate in giving meaning to our past rather than passively suffering under its weight. We recognize ourselves as co-creators of our history's significance rather than its helpless subjects. The eternal present, This expanded temporal field, where past and future converge in the now, becomes the site of potential reconciliation. Here, acceptance is not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing practice of integration, reinterpretation, and affirmation. We do not simply accept what happened once and for all, but continually renew our relationship with our history as we ourselves evolve. This reconciliation manifests as a particular quality of presence, one unconstrained by defensive avoidance of painful memories or anxious anticipation of similar future experiences. The person who's made peace with their past can be more fully available to the present moment, engaging with current circumstances from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation. Psychologist Irvin Yalom captures this temporal reconciliation in his concept of rippling, the recognition that our actions continue to influence the world in ways that extend beyond our individual lifespans. When we acknowledge how past choices, even painful ones, have contributed to who we are and what we can offer the world now, we begin to see our history not merely as personal burden, but as part of a larger tapestry of causes and effects that continues to unfold. This expanded temporal consciousness doesn't erase the specificity of past suffering or the gravity of mistakes made. Rather, it recontextualizes them within a larger view of life as continuous becoming. From this perspective, no moment stands in isolation. Each emerges from and contributes to an ongoing process of which we are both products and producers. Necessity and freedom, the paradox of authentic choice. Central to Nietzsche's philosophy is a complex understanding of the relationship between necessity and freedom, one that challenges conventional dichotomies and points toward a more nuanced conception of authentic choice. This understanding illuminates the path toward accepting our past without falling into either fatalism or denial of responsibility. The Western philosophical tradition has often framed freedom and determinism as mutually exclusive alternatives. Either our actions result from free choice, or they are determined by prior causes beyond our control. This dichotomy creates a seemingly irresolvable tension in how we relate to our past decisions. If we were free, regret seems justified but potentially crushing. If we were determined, regret seems pointless but potentially demoralizing. Nietzsche's concept of Amor Fati suggests a way beyond this impasse. Rather than denying either freedom or necessity, it reconceives their relationship. For Nietzsche, true freedom doesn't mean freedom from necessity, but freedom within and through necessity, the capacity to affirm and incorporate necessity into one's own will. In Beyond Good and Evil, he writes, "The unfree will is mythology. In real life, it is only a question of strong and weak wills." This cryptic statement points toward his view that freedom doesn't consist in being uncaused or undetermined, but in expressing one's essential nature powerfully and coherently. A strong will doesn't escape necessity, but embraces and directs it. This perspective transforms how we might understand past choices. Each decision we made reflected who we were at that moment, our values, beliefs, desires, fears, and limitations. Given all these factors, could we truly have acted otherwise? And if not, what meaning does regret hold? Nietzsche's answer is subtle. Our past actions were indeed necessary, given who we were then. Yet this necessity doesn't render them meaningless or exempt from evaluation. Rather, it invites a different kind of evaluation. Not, could I have done otherwise? But, what does this choice reveal about who I was? And who do I wish to become now? This shift moves us from unproductive regret toward productive self-knowledge. Instead of condemning our past self for failing to be who we are now, we recognize that self as a necessary stage in our becoming. This recognition doesn't preclude moral assessment, but contextualizes it within a developmental understanding of character formation. The freedom that emerges from this perspective is paradoxical, yet profound. We become free not by escaping our past, but by fully incorporating it, by recognizing every experience, choice, and circumstance as integral to who we are. When nothing in our history is alien to us, when we have claimed even our mistakes and sufferings as our own, we achieve a kind of sovereignty over our life narrative. Existentialist philosophers who followed Nietzsche developed this theme further. Jean-Paul Sartre's famous dictum that existence precedes essence suggests that we create our nature through our choices, rather than expressing a predetermined essence. Yet these choices occur within concrete situations that constrain possibilities. Freedom for Sartre means taking responsibility for how we respond to these situations rather than pretending we could escape them entirely. Similarly, Simone de Beauvoir emphasized that freedom is always situated within particular historical, social, and personal circumstances. Authentic freedom doesn't mean transcending these circumstances, but engaging with them consciously and purposefully. This engagement includes acknowledging how past choices have shaped present possibilities without surrendering to deterministic fatalism. These existentialist insights complement Nietzsche's Amor Fati by highlighting that acceptance of the past need not diminish our sense of agency in the present. Indeed, it may enhance it by grounding our choices in realistic self-understanding rather than self-deception. When we acknowledge how we came to be who we are, including the mistakes and painful experiences that shaped us, we gain clarity about who we might become. This integration of necessity and freedom manifests as a particular quality of action, one neither constrained by rigid determinism nor unmoored in abstract voluntarism. The person who has embraced their fate acts from the fullness of their history rather than in rebellion against it. Their choices express not just present desires, but the accumulated wisdom of past experience, including the wisdom gleaned from suffering and mistake. The paradox resolves in the recognition that we become most free when we stop fighting against what we cannot change and instead direct our creative energies toward what we can influence. By accepting it was thus, we open ourselves to the question of what might be now. This acceptance doesn't guarantee happiness or success, but it does offer something perhaps more valuable: the opportunity to live authentically within the actual conditions of our existence rather than in futile resistance to them. The courage to see, self-knowledge, and radical honesty. The path toward accepting our past requires a particular kind of courage, the courage to see ourselves clearly without the distorting lenses of self-justification or self-condemnation. This clarity demands radical honesty about who we have been, the choices we have made, and their consequences, both for ourselves and others. Nietzsche placed tremendous value on this kind of unflinching self-examination. In Ecce Homo, he writes, "How much truth can a spirit bear? How much truth can a spirit dare?" More and more that became for me the real measure of value. This capacity to face truth, especially uncomfortable truths about oneself, stands as a prerequisite for genuine self-acceptance. Yet such honesty doesn't come easily. We employ numerous psychological defenses to protect ourselves from painful self-knowledge, rationalization, projection, denial, selective attention, and various forms of self-deception. These mechanisms serve an important protective function, shielding us from overwhelming distress. However, when they become habitual or excessive, they prevent the very integration that would ultimately heal us. The challenge lies in developing sufficient inner strength to face aspects of ourselves and our history that we might prefer to avoid. This strength doesn't emerge from abstract intellectual commitment, but from gradual expansion of our capacity to tolerate discomfort and ambiguity. We become able to acknowledge uncomfortable truths, not by forcing ourselves to confront them all at once, but by progressively extending the boundaries of what we can bear to know. Psychological research on self-compassion offers important insights into this process. Studies by Kristin Neff and others suggest that self-compassion, treating oneself with the same kindness and understanding one might offer a good friend, facilitates rather than impedes honest self-appraisal. When we feel fundamentally secure, we become more capable of acknowledging mistakes without defensiveness. This finding aligns with Nietzschean philosophy more than might initially appear. While Nietzsche often criticized what he saw as sentimental compassion, his concept of Amor Fati contains a profound form of self-compassion, an acceptance of the entirety of one's being, including its limitations and failings. This acceptance doesn't require self-flagellation or harsh judgment. Rather, it calls for the courage to see oneself plainly, without either inflation or diminishment. The process of developing this courage typically unfolds through several stages. First comes the willingness to question our existing narratives about ourselves and our past. This questioning opens space for new perspectives and interpretations, challenging the fixed stories we have told ourselves about who we are and why we have acted as we have. Next comes the careful examination of specific memories, choices, and patterns, attending to both facts and feelings without immediately trying to resolve or explain them away. This examination requires a quality of presence, the ability to stay with discomfort rather than escaping into distraction, rationalization, or premature closure. Then comes the integration of previously disowned aspects of our experience into a more comprehensive self-understanding. This integration doesn't mean uncritical acceptance of harmful patterns, but rather acknowledgement of their reality within our history and psychology. Finally comes the transformation of our relationship with these experiences from rejection to incorporation. We recognize that even our mistakes and sufferings have contributed to who we are now and may contain valuable lessons or strengths not immediately apparent. Throughout this process, the distinction between acceptance and approval remains crucial. We can accept that certain actions or choices occurred without approving of them morally. We can acknowledge harmful patterns without condoning them. This distinction allows us to maintain ethical standards while still embracing the totality of our history. The radical honesty required for Amor Fati extends beyond acknowledging obvious mistakes to recognizing subtler forms of self-deception. We might need to confront how we have used victimhood to avoid responsibility, how we have disguised fear as principle, or how we have substituted abstract ideals for genuine engagement with life's complexity. Nietzsche was particularly concerned with unmasking what he called metaphysical comfort, the tendency to seek refuge in abstract concepts, moral absolutes, or otherworldly promises rather than facing existence directly. For him, true courage consisted not in adherence to external standards, but in creating meaning within the actual conditions of one's life, including its tragedies and contradictions. This courage manifests differently across individuals and circumstances. For some, it might mean acknowledging how they have harmed others through selfishness or indifference. For others, it might involve recognizing how they have diminished themselves through excessive compliance with others' expectations. For still others, it might require confronting how fear has limited their choices and possibilities. Whatever its specific content, this honest self-appraisal serves not to condemn, but to liberate. By seeing ourselves clearly, neither inflating our virtues nor magnifying our flaws, we establish the foundation for genuine self-acceptance. We create the conditions under which Amor Fati becomes possible not as philosophical abstraction, but as lived experience. Transfiguration, finding meaning in suffering. Among the most challenging aspects of accepting our past is coming to terms with experiences of suffering, trauma, and loss. These experiences can seem not just painful, but meaningless. Random afflictions that have damaged us without purpose or justification. How might we apply the principle of Amor Fati to such experiences without trivializing their impact or surrendering to fatalism? Nietzsche addressed this profound question throughout his philosophy, having experienced significant physical suffering himself through chronic illness. He was intimately familiar with the challenge of finding meaning in pain. His approach centered on what might be called the transfiguration of suffering, its transformation through interpretation and integration. In The Gay Science, he writes, "Only great pain is the ultimate liberator of the spirit. Only great pain, that long, slow pain in which we are burned with green wood, as it were, pain which takes its time, only this forces us philosophers to descend into our ultimate depths. I doubt that such pain makes us better, but I know that it makes us more profound." This passage suggests that suffering, while never desirable for its own sake, can serve as a catalyst for deeper understanding and self-knowledge. Pain breaks open our habitual patterns of thought and feeling, creating space for new insights and perspectives. It confronts us with fundamental questions about meaning, purpose, and value that we might otherwise avoid. The key distinction in Nietzsche's approach is between passive suffering, in which pain is merely endured as meaningless affliction, and active suffering, in which pain becomes integrated into a larger narrative of growth and self-creation. This distinction doesn't diminish the reality of the pain, but transforms its significance within our life story. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, developed a similar perspective in his logotherapy approach. Drawing on his own experience of extreme suffering, Frankl argued that humans can endure almost any how if they have a sufficient why. While not directly influenced by Nietzsche, his emphasis on finding meaning within suffering rather than escaping from it resonates with the concept of Amor Fati. This approach stands in contrast to both Stoic detachment and religious consolation. It neither denies the reality of suffering nor relegates its meaning to a transcendent realm beyond experience. Instead, it locates meaning within the immanent process of how we incorporate suffering into our becoming. This incorporation occurs through several interrelated processes. First, suffering often reveals aspects of reality and ourselves that remain hidden during more comfortable periods. Pain strips away pretense and exposes our fundamental values, fears, and capacities. This revelation, while disorienting, provides essential self-knowledge that can inform more authentic future choices. Second, the experience of overcoming or enduring suffering develops qualities of character that might otherwise remain dormant. Resilience, compassion, patience, and wisdom often emerge most powerfully from confrontation with difficulty rather than from ease or comfort. Third, suffering creates possibilities for meaning-making through the stories we tell about it. When we can narrate our pain within a larger framework of purpose or growth, we transform it from mere affliction into formative experience. This narrative integration doesn't erase the pain, but gives it context and significance. The transfiguration of suffering doesn't imply that all pain serves some predetermined purpose, or that suffering should be sought out for its supposed benefits. Nietzsche was not advocating masochism or the glorification of suffering for its own sake. Rather, he suggested that given the inevitability of pain within human life, our relationship with that pain matters profoundly. This perspective speaks directly to how we might accept painful aspects of our past. Events that caused us harm, whether through our own mistakes, others' actions, or impersonal circumstance, need not remain as mere wounds or obstacles to happiness. Through the alchemy of interpretation and integration, they can become constitutive elements of who we are, not despite, but because of what they have taught us. Modern trauma research offers empirical support for this philosophical insight through the concept of post-traumatic growth. Studies consistently show that many individuals who experience trauma subsequently report positive psychological changes alongside their suffering, deepened relationships, enhanced appreciation for life, recognition of new possibilities, increased personal strength, and spiritual development. This growth doesn't negate the trauma, but emerges through the process of grappling with it. The transfiguration of suffering within Amor Fati involves seeing how even our darkest experiences have contributed to our current capabilities, insights, and values. The person who has survived loss may develop extraordinary capacity for presence and appreciation. The one who has made serious mistakes may cultivate unusual compassion for others' failings. The survivor of trauma may discover unexpected reservoirs of strength and resilience. This recognition doesn't justify the suffering or suggest it was meant to be in some cosmic sense. Rather, it acknowledges how we have actively shaped meaning from circumstances we did not choose. In doing so, we claim agency within constraint. We demonstrate that while we cannot control everything that happens to us, we maintain significant power over how those happenings become integrated into our being. Creating versus discovering the active nature of acceptance. A common misconception about accepting one's past is that it represents a passive discovery of some pre-existing truth about oneself or one's history. Nietzsche's philosophy challenges this view, suggesting instead that acceptance involves active creation rather than mere discovery. This creative dimension transforms acceptance from resignation to affirmation. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche writes, "What is now decisive against Christianity is our taste, no longer our reasons." This cryptic statement points toward his view that values emerge not from abstract reason or external authority, but from the aesthetic sensibility of the individual. We create meaning through interpretation rather than discovering it as an objective fact. This perspective applies directly to how we relate to our past. When we accept our history, we are not simply acknowledging what objectively happened. We are actively interpreting those events, selecting which aspects to emphasize, determining their significance within our larger life narrative, and creating meaning from raw experience. This creative dimension becomes particularly apparent when we consider that multiple interpretations of the same events are always possible. The same failure could be framed as evidence of personal inadequacy or as a necessary step in learning. The same relationship breakdown could be viewed as meaningless suffering or as crucial for personal growth. The same childhood difficulty could be seen as debilitating trauma or as the source of unique strengths and sensitivities. None of these interpretations changes the factual reality of what occurred. Yet each creates a profoundly different relationship between ourselves and our history. The framework of Amor Fati invites us to exercise this interpretive freedom in ways that affirm rather than diminish life, to create narratives that incorporate rather than reject necessary aspects of our experience. This creative dimension distinguishes Amor Fati from mere resignation or passive acceptance. We are not simply submitting to an immutable past, but actively transforming our relationship with it through interpretation and integration. In this sense, we become artists of our own lives, shaping meaning from the raw material of experience. French philosopher Michel Foucault, influenced by Nietzschean thought, described this as the aesthetics of existence, the idea that we might approach our lives as works of art to be crafted rather than as moral problems to be solved. From this perspective, accepting our past involves creative stylization rather than conformity to external standards or discovery of hidden truth. This aesthetic approach doesn't mean abandoning ethical considerations or denying factual reality. The creative dimension of acceptance occurs within constraints. We cannot simply invent a past that never happened. But within these constraints, significant interpretive freedom remains. We choose which aspects of our history to foreground, which connections to emphasize, which meanings to create. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, writing about forgiveness and reconciliation with the past, emphasized the importance of narrative in this process. For Arendt, human action always occurs within a web of relationships and interpretations. The meaning of any action emerges not just from intention or consequence, but from how that action becomes incorporated into ongoing stories. Through narrative, we transform raw happenings into meaningful events, with places in larger patterns. This narrative creativity operates both individually and collectively. Societies, like individuals, must continually reinterpret their histories, not to deny difficult truths, but to integrate them into evolving self-understandings. The most successful collective reconciliations with troubled pasts involve neither forgetting nor obsessive fixation, but creative incorporation through commemoration, education, and transformation. On the individual level, this creative acceptance manifests as what psychologists call narrative identity, the ongoing story we tell about who we are and how we came to be this way. Research shows that psychological well-being correlates strongly with particular qualities in these self-narratives: coherence, the story makes sense; openness, the story remains revisable; complexity, the story acknowledges contradictions and ambiguities; and growth orientation, the story emphasizes development rather than stagnation. The concept of Amor Fati offers a powerful framework for developing these narrative qualities. When we love our fate, we seek coherence not by denying difficult aspects of our history, but by incorporating them. We maintain openness by recognizing that our current interpretation is itself part of an ongoing process rather than a final truth. We embrace complexity by acknowledging the multiple, sometimes contradictory meanings within our experiences, and we orient toward growth by viewing our past not as deterministic limitation, but as the necessary foundation for our becoming. This creative dimension reveals another paradox within acceptance. We become most accepting of our past, not when we stop caring about it, but when we care about it differently. When we approach it with curiosity and creativity, rather than resistance and recrimination. True acceptance doesn't mean indifference to our history, but transformed engagement with it. Bodies and histories, the embodied nature of memory. Our pasts live not just in abstract memory, but in our physical beings. The body carries history in ways both obvious and subtle, in scars, chronic tensions, habitual postures, automatic reactions, and somatic responses to triggering situations. This embodied dimension adds complexity to the challenge of accepting our past, but it also offers unique resources for integration and healing. Nietzsche, despite his reputation as an abstract philosopher, placed significant emphasis on embodiment throughout his work. He criticized the Western philosophical tradition for its tendency to elevate mind over body and abstract reason over instinct and sensation. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he has his protagonist declare, "Body am I entirely and nothing more, and soul is only the name of something in the body." This physiological perspective informed his understanding of how we relate to our histories. For Nietzsche, the spirit of revenge manifests not just as conscious resentment, but as embodied resistance, tension, inhibition, and constraint within the physical organism itself. Similarly, Amor Fati represents not just an intellectual stance, but a bodily capacity, an expansive physiology capable of incorporating and transforming experience rather than contracting against it. Contemporary trauma research strongly supports this embodied understanding. The work of psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk and others demonstrates how traumatic experiences become encoded in the body, creating patterns of physiological response that persist long after the events themselves. The body maintains a somatic memory that operates largely independently of narrative memory, influencing how we react to present circumstances without our conscious awareness. This embodied dimension helps explain why intellectual understanding alone often proves insufficient for genuine acceptance of difficult past experiences. We may consciously recognize the value of accepting what cannot be changed, while our bodies continue to contract against remembered pain. We may verbally affirm integration while physiologically maintaining patterns of defense and avoidance. Genuine Amor Fati must therefore include the body. Acceptance happens not just through changed thinking, but through transformed embodiment, the development of new physiological patterns that support integration rather than resistance. This transformation rarely occurs through cognitive effort alone. It requires practices that directly engage the body's wisdom and adaptive capacities. Various somatic approaches offer pathways toward this embodied acceptance. Mindfulness practices develop the capacity to observe bodily sensations without immediate reaction, creating space between stimulus and response. Movement disciplines like yoga, tai chi, and dance provide structured ways to explore new patterns of tension and release. body-oriented therapies facilitate awareness and release of held patterns associated with past experiences. Through these approaches, we gradually develop what might be called somatic acceptance, the body's capacity to remain open and responsive even in the presence of difficult memories or sensations. This capacity manifests as a particular quality of embodiment, neither rigid control nor helpless reactivity, but poised responsiveness that accommodates experience without being overwhelmed by it. This embodied dimension reveals yet another layer of Amor Fati. To love our fate includes loving the body that has been shaped by that fate, acknowledging how our physical being carries our history not as burden but as wisdom. The body that has survived difficulty contains not just trauma but resilience, not just wound but adaptation. The integration of embodied experience offers unique resources for reconciliation with our past. Unlike abstract thought, which can become trapped in loops of rumination and self-judgment, embodied awareness provides direct access to present experience. The body always exists now, even as it carries the imprints of then. This presentness offers an anchor for integration, a way of being with past experience from the stability of current embodiment. Moreover, the body's inherent tendency toward homeostasis and healing provides a natural momentum toward integration when given appropriate support. Just as physical wounds heal when conditions support rather than impede natural processes, psychological wounds move toward integration when embodied awareness creates space for this movement. The body knows how to digest experience when we learn to listen to and support its wisdom. This embodied perspective doesn't diminish the importance of narrative and meaning-making in accepting our past. Rather, it grounds these processes in lived experience rather than abstract conceptualization. Our stories about our history become most authentic and healing when they emerge from felt sense rather than imposed interpretation, when they express rather than override embodied knowing. The philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, exploring the primacy of embodied perception, suggested that the body is our original means of relating to the world, the foundation upon which all other forms of understanding build. From this perspective, accepting our past must begin with accepting our embodied experience of that past, the sensations, emotions, and physiological patterns through which our history lives in us now. Between isolation and dissolution, accepting the past in relationship. Accepting our past occurs not in isolation, but within webs of relationship. Our histories are always already intersubjective, shaped by and shared with others. This relational dimension adds complexity to the challenge of acceptance, but also offers essential resources for healing and integration. Nietzsche, often portrayed as a philosopher of radical individualism, recognized this intersubjective nature of human experience. In Beyond Good and Evil, he observes, the "thou shalt" is still older than the "I will." Our sense of self emerges through interaction with others before becoming capable of genuine autonomy. Even our most personal memories exist within social and cultural contexts that shape their meaning and significance. This relational perspective transforms how we understand accepting our past. True acceptance involves not just reconciliation with our individual history, but recognition of how that history connects to larger patterns of relationship, community, and culture. We accept not just what we have done and experienced, but how these actions and experiences have affected and been affected by others. The challenge lies in finding balance between two extremes, isolation and dissolution. In isolation, we attempt to accept our past entirely alone, without reference to how others have shared and shaped our experiences. In dissolution, we lose ourselves entirely in others' interpretations and judgments, surrendering our own perspective on our history. Neither extreme allows for genuine integration. The middle path involves what philosopher Martin Buber called the I-thou relationship, a mode of relating that honors both self and other as subjects rather than objects. Within this relational space, acceptance of the past becomes a dialogical rather than monological process. We neither impose our interpretation on others nor uncritically adopt theirs. Instead, we create meaning together through ongoing conversation and mutual recognition. This relational dimension becomes particularly important when our past includes harm, both harm we have caused and harm we have suffered. Accepting responsibility for harm caused doesn't mean isolated self-flagellation, but engaged reckoning with the impact of our actions on others. Similarly, accepting harm suffered doesn't mean private resignation, but acknowledgement of how others' actions have affected us, often with appropriate communication of this impact. Restorative justice practices offer valuable insights into this relational dimension of acceptance. These approaches focus not on abstract punishment, but on concrete repair of relationships damaged by harmful actions. Through facilitated dialogue between those who have caused harm and those affected by it, participants create shared understanding of what happened and collaboratively determine appropriate restitution. This model suggests that genuine acceptance of difficult aspects of our past often requires conversation with those who shared those experiences, not to assign blame, but to create mutual understanding. When direct conversation isn't possible due to death, distance, or safety concerns, we might find surrogates through therapy, support groups, or other communities where our experiences can be witnessed and validated. The psychological concept of witnessing proves crucial here. Many traumatic experiences become particularly difficult to integrate because they occurred in isolation or were subsequently denied by others. Having our experiences acknowledged by others, having them seen and recognized as real, creates essential conditions for our own acceptance of them. This witnessing doesn't mean uncritical validation of every interpretation we place on our experiences. Others may see dimensions of our history that remain invisible to us, challenging our preferred narratives in ways that ultimately support deeper integration. The key quality of witnessing is not agreement, but presence. The willingness to stay engaged with the full reality of what has occurred rather than turning away. Communities play vital roles in this relational acceptance. Religious communities have long provided rituals of confession, forgiveness, and reconciliation that facilitate acceptance of difficult aspects of personal history. Therapeutic communities offer structured environments for exploring past experiences with skilled guidance and peer support. Cultural practices like storytelling, art making, and commemoration create shared frameworks for integrating individual and collective histories. Even our relationship with the dead and absent shapes how we accept our past. Through memory, imagination, and internal dialogue, we continue relationships with those no longer physically present. These internalized relationships influence how we interpret and integrate shared history. Sometimes acceptance requires imagined conversations, speaking to those no longer available, and listening for responses that might emerge from our deeper knowing. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas emphasized how the face of the other, their irreducible presence as a being beyond our comprehension, calls us to ethical responsibility. This encounter with otherness prevents us from closing our narrative too neatly or comfortably. The presence of others reminds us that our history exists not just for us, but within a shared world where our actions matter beyond our individual meaning-making. This relational dimension reveals another aspect of Amor Fati. To love our fate includes loving how we have been shaped by encounters with others, recognizing that our identity emerges not in isolation, but through relationship. The self that accepts its history is always already an intersubjective self, constituted through countless interactions that leave their imprint on who we are and who we might become. The practice of acceptance, from philosophical ideal to lived experience. Philosophical ideals like Amor Fati offer powerful frameworks for understanding how we might relate to our past. Yet translating these ideals into lived experience requires more than intellectual comprehension. It demands sustained practice and engagement. How might we cultivate genuine acceptance as an ongoing way of being, rather than a merely theoretical stance? Nietzsche himself recognized the gap between conceptual understanding and embodied wisdom. In Twilight of the Idols, he writes, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." This often quoted aphorism points toward a truth about acceptance. It emerges not through abstract contemplation alone, but through actual engagement with life's challenges. We learn to accept by accepting, by practicing this orientation within concrete situations rather than simply thinking about it. This practice-based approach aligns with ancient philosophical traditions that viewed philosophy not primarily as theoretical discourse, but as way of life, to use Pierre Hadot's phrase. For Stoics, Epicureans, and other Hellenistic schools, philosophical principles gained meaning through their application in daily living. Similarly, Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Taoism emphasize practice rather than mere belief as the path to wisdom. Drawing on these traditions and contemporary psychological research, we can identify several key practices that support the cultivation of Amor Fati as a lived experience. Mindfulness practices develop our capacity to observe experiences without immediate judgment or reaction. Through sustained attention to present moment sensations, emotions, and thoughts, we learn to create space between stimulus and response, between what happens and how we interpret it. This spaciousness allows for more intentional engagement with our experiences rather than automatic patterns of resistance or attachment. Meditation teacher Tara Brach describes this as the sacred pause, the moment when we stop and simply witness what is occurring before reacting to it. This pause doesn't guarantee acceptance, but creates conditions where acceptance becomes possible. It interrupts habitual patterns of resistance and allows fresh perspectives to emerge. Contemplative inquiry involves asking deep questions about our relationship with our history. Rather than seeking definitive answers, this practice creates ongoing dialogue between different aspects of our experience. We might inquire, what am I resisting in this memory? How would I relate to this experience if I didn't need to defend against it? What might this difficulty have taught me that I couldn't have learned otherwise? These questions open space for new understandings without forcing particular conclusions. Philosopher Simone Weil described attention as the rarest and purest form of generosity. When we offer this quality of attention to our own history, neither clinging to pleasant aspects nor fleeing from painful ones. We create conditions for genuine integration rather than selective acknowledgement. Narrative practices involve consciously exploring different ways of telling our life story. Rather than assuming a single true narrative, we experiment with multiple tellings that emphasize different themes, connections, and meanings. Through this experimentation, we discover more integrated and life-affirming ways to carry our history without denying its complexity or difficulty. Psychologist Dan McAdams has researched how redemptive sequences in life narratives, stories that acknowledge difficulty but frame it within larger patterns of growth, learning, or contribution, correlate with psychological well-being. This finding suggests that acceptance involves not denying challenges, but contextualizing them within broader narratives of meaning. Somatic practices engage the body's wisdom in the process of integration. Through mindful movement, breath work, and direct attention to physical sensations, we address the embodied dimensions of our history. These practices help release held patterns associated with difficult experiences and develop new capacities for presence and response. Trauma specialist Peter Levine emphasizes how completing interrupted defensive responses can facilitate healing from traumatic experiences. When threat overwhelms our capacity to respond effectively, the energy of self-protection may become trapped in the body. Somatic practices provide safe contexts for completing these responses, allowing the nervous system to return to equilibrium. Relational practices involve sharing our stories with appropriate others who can witness, validate, and sometimes challenge our experiences. Through dialogue, we gain perspective on our history and discover how our individual narrative connects to broader human patterns. This sharing counters the isolation that often accompanies difficult experiences and allows for co-created meaning rather than solitary interpretation. Psychologist Brené Brown's research on vulnerability suggests that appropriate disclosure of our struggles, sharing with those who have earned the right to hear our stories, builds connection and resilience. This finding highlights how acceptance often occurs not through private resolution, but through brave communication within trustworthy relationships. Ritualized practices provide structured ways to acknowledge transitions, losses, mistakes, and transformations. Through ritual, we externalize and concretize internal processes, creating tangible markers of how we are relating to our history. These rituals need not be elaborate or traditional. They might involve writing letters, sent or unsent, creating art, performing symbolic actions, or marking anniversaries in meaningful ways. Anthropologists have observed how cultures worldwide use ritual to integrate difficult experiences into collective understanding. While contemporary Western society offers fewer established rituals for personal transitions, we retain the capacity to create meaningful ceremonial practices that support acceptance and integration. Gratitude practices cultivate appreciation for the totality of our experience rather than selective attention to preferred aspects. By regularly acknowledging what we have received, including the learning and growth that have emerged from difficulty, we develop the capacity to recognize value even in challenging aspects of our history. Research consistently shows that gratitude practices correlate with improved psychological well-being. This effect likely stems from how gratitude shifts attention from what is missing or wrong to what is present and beneficial, a shift that aligns with the affirmative orientation of Amor Fati. Service practices transform our relationship with past suffering by using it as motivation for contributing to others' well-being. When we channel the insights gained through difficulty into compassionate action, we create new meaning for experiences that might otherwise remain sources of isolated pain. This transformation doesn't justify suffering, but does integrate it into a larger narrative of purpose. Viktor Frankl emphasized how finding meaning through contribution to others helped concentration camp survivors endure seemingly unbearable conditions. This observation suggests that acceptance often emerges not through direct focus on our own healing, but through redirecting attention toward how our experience might benefit others. These various practices share certain qualities. They engage multiple dimensions of experience: cognitive, emotional, somatic, relational. They prioritize process over outcome, and they acknowledge acceptance as an ongoing orientation rather than a final achievement. We don't achieve Amor Fati once and for all, but continually cultivate it through renewed engagement with our evolving relationship to our history. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum describes a similar approach in her concept of non-judgmental acceptance, a stance that fully acknowledges reality without either condemnation or idealization. This acceptance requires what she calls loving attention, a gaze that neither flinches from difficulty nor reduces the object of attention to its difficulty. Such attention sees the whole rather than fixating on isolated aspects. This holistic quality characterizes mature acceptance as described across philosophical and psychological traditions. We accept not just isolated events or choices, but the complex totality of our history, how each element has contributed to the tapestry of who we are. This acceptance acknowledges both agency and limitation, both choice and constraint, both responsibility and context. Through sustained practice, acceptance gradually shifts from effortful discipline to natural orientation. What begins as conscious exercise becomes integrated capacity, a way of being rather than something we do. We find ourselves responding to life with greater spaciousness, flexibility, and presence, less constrained by unresolved history or defensive patterns. This integration manifests as particular qualities of relationship with our past, neither obsessive fixation nor avoidant denial, but balanced acknowledgement, neither harsh judgment nor uncritical approval, but nuanced understanding, neither rigid certainty nor chaotic confusion, but open coherence. We carry our history neither as burden nor as badge, but as the ground from which our present unfolds. Conclusion: the freedom of embracing what was. Throughout this exploration of accepting our past through the lens of Nietzsche's Amor Fati, we have encountered numerous paradoxes: freedom emerging from necessity, agency discovered within constraint, creation operating within acceptance, strength developing through vulnerability, and wholeness incorporating rather than transcending limitation. These paradoxes point toward a profound truth about human existence: that authentic living involves not escape from our conditions, but creative engagement with them. The path of Amor Fati offers no easy solutions or comforting illusions. It doesn't promise to erase painful memories or undo harmful choices. It doesn't guarantee happiness or success by conventional measures. What it offers instead is something perhaps more valuable: the possibility of genuine reconciliation with the totality of our experience, a reconciliation that liberates energy previously consumed by resistance and regret. This reconciliation manifests as a particular quality of presence, one characterized by openness to what is rather than fixation on what might have been. The person who has made peace with their history stands more firmly in the present moment, neither haunted by the past nor anxious about the future. This grounded presence creates space for authentic response rather than reactive pattern, for creative engagement rather than compulsive repetition. Such presence doesn't emerge from denying or minimizing difficult aspects of our history. On the contrary, it requires unflinching acknowledgement of everything that has shaped us, our mistakes and failures, our losses and traumas, our limitations and constraints. Only by fully including what has been can we fully inhabit what is. The philosophical stance of Amor Fati reminds us that acceptance is not mere resignation, but active affirmation. A yes, spoken not despite, but because of life's complexity and challenge. This affirmation doesn't depend on circumstances conforming to our preferences or life unfolding according to our plans. It finds value in the actual rather than the ideal, the real rather than the imagined. Therapist and meditation teacher Tara Brach captures this orientation in her concept of radical acceptance, the capacity to embrace reality in its fullness without resistance or condition. This acceptance, she emphasizes, doesn't preclude desire for change or commitment to growth. Rather, it establishes the foundation from which authentic change becomes possible, change motivated by love rather than fear, by vision rather than rejection. This distinction between acceptance and resignation proves crucial for understanding Amor Fati. To love our fate doesn't mean abandoning aspiration or surrendering to determinism. It means recognizing that genuine freedom operates within, rather than against, the actual conditions of our existence, including our history with all its complexity and contradiction. The psychologist and philosopher William James expressed a similar insight when he wrote, "My first act of free will shall be to believe in free will." This apparent paradox points toward how freedom and necessity intertwine, how choice operates not by escaping conditions, but by engaging with them creatively and intentionally. Applied to our relationship with our past, this perspective suggests that we become most free, not by denying or regretting our history, but by fully incorporating it, by recognizing every experience, choice, and circumstance as integral to who we are now. When nothing in our history remains alien to us, when we have claimed even our mistakes and sufferings as our own, we achieve a kind of sovereignty over our life narrative. This sovereignty manifests not as control over what happens, but as authority over its meaning in our lives. We cannot change the factual content of the past, but we retain significant power over how we carry it within us, how we interpret its significance, integrate its lessons, and allow it to inform without determining our future choices. The philosopher Hannah Arendt identified two capacities as essential for human freedom within the constraints of our existence: forgiveness and promise-making. Forgiveness releases us from being endlessly defined by past actions, our own or others. Promise-making allows us to create islands of predictability in an uncertain future. Together, these capacities create space for new beginnings even within established patterns. This perspective aligns remarkably well with Nietzsche's Amor Fati. When we fully accept our past, embracing rather than merely tolerating it, we free ourselves from its unconscious determination of our present choices. This freedom doesn't erase the past's influence, but transforms its operation from compulsion to resource, from limitation to foundation. The ultimate gift of this acceptance is a particular quality of joy, what Nietzsche called the eternal joy of becoming. This joy doesn't depend on circumstances being ideal or life proceeding according to plan. It emerges from full participation in the dynamic process of existence itself, a process that includes growth and decay, creation and destruction, pleasure and pain. In his late work Exe Homo, Nietzsche wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it." This love represents not sentimental attachment, but mature recognition, seeing how every element of our experience, including its difficulties and contradictions, has contributed to the tapestry of who we are. From this recognition emerges not resignation, but affirmation, not passive acceptance, but active embrace. The past, with all its complexity, remains forever part of us, not as burden, but as foundation, not as limitation, but as the very ground from which our present unfolds. When we learn to love what has been, we become more fully available to what is and what might be. In this availability lies the freedom that Amor Fati ultimately offers, not freedom from necessity, but freedom within and through it. In closing, perhaps the deepest wisdom of accepting our past lies in recognizing that we are simultaneously shaped by and shapers of our own history. We neither choose everything that happens to us, nor are we merely passive recipients of circumstance. We exist in the creative middle ground between determination and possibility, constraint and freedom, necessity and choice. To embrace this middle ground, to love our fate without surrendering to fatalism, represents a profound achievement of human consciousness. It requires the courage to see clearly, the wisdom to interpret generously, and the compassion to include all that we have been within all that we are becoming. This integration offers no perfect resolution or final closure, but rather an ongoing dance with the ever-unfolding story of our lives. A dance that transforms even our difficulties and regrets into essential steps in our becoming. The invitation of Amor Fati is ultimately an invitation to wholeness, to gathering all fragments of our experience, even those we might prefer to disown, into a coherent, if complex understanding of who we are. This wholeness doesn't erase contradiction or eliminate struggle, but holds them within a larger affirmation of life itself, an affirmation that echoes Nietzsche's fundamental insight, that what appears as burden may, when fully embraced, reveal itself as gift.